We've been talking about different issues that have been coming up for us in our ministries, respective ministries, that where we both mostly work with people who've been experiencing homelessness. And let's talk a bit about some specific issues. I think one of the biggest ones that comes up all the time for me, both on the side of people that are interested in helping the ministry and also with the people who are being helped by the ministry. And those are questions about drug use and substance abuse. I get asked all the time about the homeless population. Are they all on drugs? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, that's a question we also get asked really often, because the stigma and the stereotypes are that everybody's on the street because they're addicted and mentally ill. And I think that there's data that does say that addiction is a high problem in the homeless population. But maybe I think a good thing to do would be to ask ourselves why. Why is it a problem in the homeless population? And then how does that compare to the general population? The statistics that I've seen are that the percentage of homeless people who are addicted to a substance is not too much higher than the general population. The difference is that when people are addicted that have homes, they can hide it and we don't see it. And they have the ability to use things to mask that and however that looks. But with addiction on the street, I mean, it's right out there, and you're seeing people laying on the sidewalk, and you're seeing needles and all those kinds of things. So I think to ask the question, why are homeless people struggling with addiction, and what should we do about it? So my thought is that I've seen a lot of people become addicted as a result of becoming homeless. That maybe they had a proclivity to things that were, dissociating or an escape, like a lot of us do. I mean, me also. And maybe they end up on the street and see just how much despair there is, and start to experience that for themselves, and try to find a way to cope with that. So in a lot of cases, the friends that we serve, we've asked them, is this addiction a result? Is this what caused you to become homeless, or is this something that you've developed as a result of being on the street? And a lot of times it has either developed or highly increased as a result of being on the street and being lonely and being hopeless. And I think about my own self and the tendency that I would have to want to just get out of that for a while and to numb myself and all that. And I can empathize with people that do that. So I've seen, I think that we need to be careful not to say that everybody is homeless because they are a drug addict. It is certainly an issue in the homeless community, but it's not the cause of homelessness altogether. So with that said, we're practicing ministry. We're out dealing with people and friends that we know who are struggling with addictions. So what's the best thing for us to do to help them?
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. And I think that, to your point, that when you start thinking about something like addiction or drug use in relationship to the wider population, that you do get, I think, a healthier, more accurate understanding of what a particular group of people is going through. I think if we're trying to think through biblically, that and not all addictions, I might say, I'd have to think about this more, but as of right now, I might say there might be some addictions that are not necessarily sinful, but if we think about the addictions that are, and I think we would probably both agree that when we'll talk about this maybe more as we go along here, that substance abuse, that drug use, a lack of sober-mindedness, we would say biblically, is sinful. And it is addictive, but there isn't, when we start thinking through this biblically, the Bible doesn't divide up our sinful tendencies the way that our society does. So you don't have a list of sins that are addictive and a list of sins that are illegal, and then a list of sins that are neither addictive nor illegal, so aren't that big a deal, right? It's sin is sin. And all sins are in some sense not in some sense, are in a very real sense, like slave masters, like Paul writes extensively about. That's one of his favorite metaphors in the book of Romans and elsewhere, that sin is a slave master. And if you become enslaved to sin, you do find yourself doing things almost by compulsion, as he talks about in Romans 7. The thing that I don't want to do, I end up doing. And the thing that I do want to do, the good that I do want to do, I find very difficult to do, or that I can't do at all. And so I think that when we begin to think more biblically about something like addiction in that light, we don't have addicts and non-addicts, right? People that have a relationship to sin that is out of control, and people that have a relationship to sin that they are in control of. It's just different things that people have different hang-ups. And a lot of times the sins that don't lead someone to become homeless, or don't contribute to some sort of economic or social destruction in their life, aren't because they're less sinful or less destructive. It's just that they're more legal, or they're more socially acceptable. So someone can be enslaved and addicted to the sin of adultery and greed, and still be housed, still be successful, still have a great stock portfolio. Maybe even they would find certain sins are helpful to that kind of prosperity, whereas somebody else who maybe has a proclivity or a disordered relationship to a substance like alcohol or methamphetamines, it doesn't lead to economic prosperity or housing stability. Now biblically, we don't want to say, well, one is better than the other because one made you a rich stockbroker and the other one made you, sleep in a gutter, right? So we don't differentiate those things that way. And we say that the solution to all of that is the grace of God coming to bear in a person's life, so that, as Paul does say over and over again in Romans, you are set free from the power of sin. And so, well, I should have premised all of that by saying I'm not a licensed or trained substance abuse counselor, and actually, even personally, I don't have extensive personal experience with substance abuse myself. I'm not a recovering addict in that sense, but I am a recovering addict from sin, because the things that have enslaved me, the things that have derailed my life at different stages in my life, had exactly that kind of hold on me that the Bible calls slavery. And I know that where I have allowed God's grace into my life, and where other people have come alongside of me and graciously been willing to help, I have experienced freedom. And so that's, I think, the greatest thing that we can bring to bear on this issue in anybody's life, no matter where they fall in the social economic strata. So, when people ask me that question, are all the people on the streets drug addicts? It is a hard question to answer, because you want to look at statistics and you want to look at data, and that's very difficult, right? Because a lot of it's self-reported. Mm-hmm. And in my experience, I would say, the vast majority of the folks that I've gotten to know and worked with over the last few years, it's been somewhere in the mix. If it wasn't their direct hang-up, it was part of the community where they were spending most of their time, so it was affecting their lives. And in a very high percentage of cases, substance abuse may be, if not the biggest obstacle in their path to moving forward in life. It was pretty close to the top. But understanding that that doesn't mean that they're hopeless. It doesn't mean that they're going to stay that way forever. And I think that's one of the problems too that we have when we stigmatize a certain set of behaviors, or a certain a certain class of destructive behaviors or sinful behaviors, or whatever we want to call them. When we stigmatize it and say you're just going to be that way forever, or even worse, we say because you're that way, you're not worth helping. I don't want to help a drug addict. I don't want to help a person with that set of problems. They're hopeless. How destructive that is for somebody on one side of the equation to think, but think about a person who's in that position, how destructive that is to have that as a part of your self-conception. I'm an addict. I'm always going to be an addict. I'm not worth helping. I'm irredeemable. I'm unhelpable. I'm unsalvageable. I can't be employed. I can't be housed. I can't be helped. I can't be loved. And I think you use the word, you empathize with people who have been put in that position by themselves and by others, and frankly by the people that are profiting a great deal off of their addictions, who want them to stay there. And what a crushing, hopeless place to be in life. And yet what a beautiful thing it is to be able to bring the light of God's love into that situation and say, there is no slave master stronger than the Lord who can set you free.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the point that you made about us not being substance abuse professionals is an important one, because many people who are going to be watching this and listening in are going to be in the same shoes as us, trying to navigate, okay, we're working with people and we love them and we don't quite know what to do about this issue, because it just seems to have such power over their life. And so thinking about it from a biblical lens and an encouraging lens is the reality that you said about no one being too far gone from the grace of God, no slave master being stronger than the Lord. And so what is it that heals addiction? Well, what is it that heals any sin, any tendency to sin? It's a new nature. It's a new heart. It's being transformed from the inside out by the gospel, and having God completely reorient your affections for things. And so to me, that brings me a lot of hope in those situations where we have a friend that's just in the throes of addiction that just seems like it's hopeless. And often times addiction's entangled with mental health and other issues too. And it just seems like such a web to try to get to, and which issue to attack first and how, and all that. And like we said, we're not mental health or substance abuse professionals, but we know the foremost mental health and substance abuse professional, the Lord Jesus Christ. And he changes lives and he does things. And so for us, we carry with us, and more accurately, we're with him, who can affect the heart in a way that makes somebody new and wipes the addiction away and sets people free. He shows that throughout the scriptures that he does that for people, and he loves to do that for people. And so I think that I need to be reminded of that often when I just see this problem just so widespread among friends that we just want so much more for. It's first recognizing that I don't have the power to change that person. Again, just coming to the conclusion that I can't save them. That's a good thing. That's a good place to be. And recognizing that we serve the one who can, and that he wants to. So yeah, I mean, practically, how would you say that in a relationship that you have with somebody who struggles with substance abuse, how do you walk with them through that?
Yeah, I think the first thing to address on the practical side is a big question that often comes up, and I think it's a good question, which is, we've been talking about substance abuse as sin, and I know some people may be offended by that, and the preferred way now, a more preferable way now of talking about it is in terms of disease. It's a disease. It's not there's not a moral component to it. And I understand why people want to do that, and I'm very sympathetic to it, actually. And so I think that, but I still want to persist in saying that there is a sin issue here, and we need to address it as such. And the reason for that, the reason I still persist in that, is that if you think about it this way: if you had someone really close to you in your life, a spouse, or a child, or a coworker, or a best friend, and they were struggling with a preventable, treatable disease, and what that disease was creating in their life was a lot of chaos. It was making them a poor partner, a poor spouse, a dysfunctional member of the family. They couldn't get the work done that they needed to get done, and they just couldn't maintain these relationships, right, because of this disease that they were struggling with. What would you expect from that person if they were really earnest in trying to maintain relationship with you and be that spouse or that family member or that coworker that you wanted, well, you'd say, it's a preventable, treatable disease. If you love me, then you'll take care of this. Then you'll deal with this. And you could use all kinds of not hardcore. If you could use lots of real life examples about what might fall into that category, right? Somebody with diabetes or struggling with obesity could say, because of what I eat, I have these mood swings, and so sometimes I'm just a real jerk to be around. And then sometimes I crash and I just want to sleep all day and nothing else matters. And so I don't go to work. And as a result, all of these things in their life gets disordered, and it's a disease. You need to say, granted, I might grant all of that. It is a disease, but it's a disease that you need to seek treatment for so that you can become the kind of person that you need to be in relationship to all of these other things, right? Your job, your family, your spouse, God himself, right? All these different relationships. And so that's, practically speaking, how I've begun that conversation with people. Like whether you're comfortable with calling it a sin or calling it a disease, there is still an obligation that God puts on us, and that we ought to put on ourselves, actually, to treat an illness or to treat a problem in our life that is destroying relationships that we say that we value. And so, again, and then coming back to the good news, which is not that God condemns us for struggling with things that are beyond our capacity to carry by ourselves. God doesn't do that. God doesn't condemn us for being weak. God invites us to allow his grace to be perfected in our weakness. So all of the commands of God are invitations into more life. And so if God is commanding us to lay down the sin that so easily ensnares us, or to get treatment for a disease that's causing a lot of chaos in our life in all of these different ways, if God is inviting us into that, then he is giving us a gift, a grace that is greater than our weakness. And so overcoming those things, whether it's an addiction or whether it's something else, going through a cancer treatment that is going to be really difficult, whatever it is, we're talking about substance abuse specifically, God's grace is sufficient to meet that weakness and to fill in what is lacking. And so from that point forward, leading people into whatever doors open up, right? Sometimes, one of the things you hear in the substance abuse realm is, every program works if you work the program. And so we've got, in Southern California where we're based, we've got everything from, the top flight LA County celebrity rehab programs to, cowboy desert rehab out in the desert, beans, rice, and Jesus Christ. And people have gone to both and had terrible results, and people have gone to both and experienced great deliverance. So whatever road a person, there's really, it's hard to say this is always the right way to send somebody, practically speaking. This rehab always works no matter what if you go do it. But practically speaking, beginning and ending with the understanding that, as I just said, that God's command is an invitation into life, and his grace is sufficient for the weakness. His grace is sufficient for the weakness. And he will fill up what is lacking in our own capacities to say no to the things he wants us to say no to, and to say yes to the things that he wants us to say yes to. And then when you walk with someone alongside of them through that process, and when you begin to see the change that comes over a person in their mind, in their body, in their relationships, as this disordered relationship to a substance, to drugs or alcohol or whatever it is, as you see that get worked out and the change that overcomes them, and the transformation in their life, there is really nothing more beautiful and tangible to say, wow, like the gospel has made a difference in their life. Yeah,
that's right. And as non-professionals, we still carry the most powerful tool there is, which is the gospel. We like you mentioned, we want to encourage our friends who are struggling with substance abuse to seek appropriate medical treatment and the things that are necessary for them, and to seek professional help from people who understand the mechanics of addiction a lot better than we do. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a role to play. And I would argue the most important role to play, which is to bring the message that they can have a new heart. They can have new affections. They don't have to be enslaved anymore. There's grace for them. And so that's my encouragement to anybody who, is just out there with people and struggling with the hope to believe that they can be different, that there can be something better for them, is the reality that we serve a God who loves those types of redemption stories, and the gospel is powerful to save people from them. So give people the gospel, tell people about Christ, pray for them, pray with them, encourage them, take them to treatment, all of the above, but attack it from a holistic perspective, central being the gospel. Trust God and love your neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely. And being, I think one of the hardest things for us to do is to be relentlessly hopeful, because in some cases, if you've ever walked alongside of someone, or you've got someone in your life that has struggled with a substance abuse problem, it feels impossible. And if it feels impossible as someone who's trying to befriend them, or somebody in your family, imagine how impossible it feels if you are that individual who's living that life, who's in the middle of it, and in some sense maybe some days recognizing it's a problem and some days not, but being relentlessly hopeful, even if it becomes obnoxious, right? Because that's something that people, I found, you can slide into. Addiction can become an identity, just like a lot of other things. I am an addict. I will always be an addict. This is. I've even heard people try to sort of Christianize it. It's my cross to bear. It's my thorn in the flesh. I've asked God to take it away, and it hasn't gone away. I've asked Jesus to lift it off of me, and it's not gone away. And there's this hopeless inevitability, like a sense that I will never be free from this, and I will always have this as my identity, and I will never be able to have a life that's different from this. And part of being relentlessly hopeful is speaking into that person's life as God leads, that those lies are not true. And the reason why that can be difficult is because often that someone who's living with that kind of, if they've really fallen into that deep into that sense of identification, that when you tell them that they're wrong, it's not going to sound like a message of hope. It's going to sound quarrelsome. It's going to sound condemning. So someone says, I will always be an addict. I'll never be able to escape from this. And you say, that's not true. Like you just said, John Mark, the gospel can set you free. Jesus has more for you in this life and the next than slavery to this thing that you hate, right? You can say that, and no matter what tone of voice you use and how you word it, if it lays a burden on them that they cannot just be content to stay down and out, it's going to be hard, and they're not going to want to hear it. And I've really experienced that. And there have been people that I've had to emphasize that to over and over and over and over again. And maybe after months or even years in some of these relationships, they've come back to me and said, those conversations saved my life. There's been other people who I hope I've been as generous and faithful towards, who we'll just say we don't have great relationships right now because they don't want to hear from me. They don't want to hear that another life is possible, because as miserable as misery is, misery can become very comfortable. And when somebody like you or me comes along and stirs up the roach nest, it's like, don't mess with it, man. Like, just leave me alone. But we have to be faithful to keep telling people the truth, that there is hope.